when the jury was all white. Chapter 1. The arrest that started it all. It was supposed to be a regular Saturday. I was walking home from my job at the corner store, still wearing the red apron with my name tag half hanging off, earbuds in, groceries in hand. Nothing unusual, nothing criminal, but as I rounded the corner near 8th and Maple, the flashing red and blue lit up my path like a trap had been waiting. 3 officers. No warning, no questions, just demands. Hands where we can see them. I froze. The bag dropped. Apples rolled into the gutter. One of them shouted again. Another reached for something. I did what I was told, but it didn't matter. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground, cheek against concrete, knees in my back, my wrists bent at an angle that made me scream. I asked what I'd done. No answer, just the sound of plastic cuffs clicking. Someone took my wallet. Someone else emptied my bag. All this on a street I'd walked my whole life. The same block where Miss Janey used to hand out lemonade, where my mum taught me to ride a bike, where I walked my baby sister in her stroller so many summers ago. The crowd started to gather. Some recorded, some didn't. The officer standing above me muttered, "Matches the description." That was it. That was all it took. In that moment, I stopped being a person and became a suspect. The ride in the back of the cruiser was silent, except for the occasional crackle of the police radio. I stared out at the town I thought I knew. And the town stared back, silent, complicit. No Miranda rights, no explanation, just cuffs. That night, I slept on a metal bench in a cold holding cell, lights buzzing overhead. I was 17, and it would take 12 years for anyone to listen to my side of the story. Chapter 2. A courtroom without color. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just the air, something in the walls, the lighting, the silence. It wasn't the kind of place where truth felt at home. It was a stage, one where every role had already been cast. I stood at the defense table next to a public defender I'd just met. He told me to keep quiet, told me he'd handle everything, told me the system would sort it all out. I didn't believe him. When the jury walked in, I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 12 white faces. Not one looked like me. Not one nodded. Not one smiled. They scanned me like a headline they'd already seen. The bailiff announced the judge. Everyone stood. I did too, but my knees felt weak. The judge entered, grey suit, gavel in hand, glasses resting on a nose that never seemed to look up. He glanced at me once. That was enough. The prosecutor laid out a version of me that I didn't recognize. Angry, violent, suspicious. He spoke with the kind of ease that comes from practice and power. The jury nodded. Some took notes. Others didn't need to. When it was our turn, my lawyer cleared his throat. He didn't ask for justice. He asked for leniency, like I was already guilty. I turned to look at the people in the gallery. My mom sat alone in the back row, hands clenched in her lap, tears held back by strength she shouldn't have needed. No one else came. My friends were told not to. My job had already filled my spot. That day, I learned something they never put in the textbooks. You can walk into a courtroom, innocent, and leave it erased. Not because of what you did, but because of who they decided you were. Chapter 3. 12 Seats, One Perspective. They say the jury is your mirror, that it reflects the community, the peers who will weigh your life in the balance. But as I sat there, staring into 12 eyes that looked nothing like mine, I didn't see a mirror. I saw a wall. One man tapped his pen without looking at me. A woman adjusted her glasses and narrowed her eyes every time my name was mentioned. Another scribbled something every time the prosecutor spoke, but his pen never moved when it was our turn. One man seemed to sigh whenever my lawyer objected, like the idea of my defense was an inconvenience. 12 people, not one from my neighborhood, not one who had to walk with their hands already in the air just in case, not one who knew what it was like to be stopped and searched for existing in the wrong skin at the wrong time. They weren't judging the case, they were judging me. Each time the prosecutor said, "the defendant," I watched the jury shift. Small movements, crossed arms, raised eyebrows, pursed lips, like they had already been told the ending and were just waiting to watch the rest play out. I tried to sit up straighter, to appear more human, more relatable. I smiled at moments when my name was spoken gently. I tried to hold eye contact with anyone who would meet it. No one did. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was the certainty. They weren't undecided. They weren't skeptical. They were already convinced. And that certainty spread. It filled the room like fog, touching the judge, the clerks, even my own lawyer. There were moments I looked over at him and saw defeat in his eyes before he even opened his mouth. My lawyer tried. He brought up inconsistencies, gaps in the story, eyewitnesses who weren't sure. He pointed out how nothing tied me directly to the crime. But it didn't matter. Because when you walk into a room already guilty in their eyes, the truth is just noise they've learned how to tune out. I thought maybe if I took the stand, they would hear me. I practiced my testimony like a prayer. But when I stood and told them where I had been, what I had done, how I had no reason to be at that gas station on the other side of town, they stared at me like I was rehearsing lines from a bad play. 12 people. One shared conclusion. That's what justice looked like in that room. And none of it looked like me. Chapter 4. The judge who never saw me. He never looked at me. Not once. From the moment I stepped into the courtroom until the day he handed down my sentence, his eyes never met mine. He looked at the file, at the prosecutor, at the clock, but not at me. His robe was spotless, his gavel polished. His voice never rose, never cracked. He ran that courtroom like a business, and I was just another number to move down the line. My lawyer tried to file a motion to dismiss. Denied. He tried to introduce character witnesses. Denied. He objected to the lineup photo being entered into evidence. It was grainy, poorly lit, and I wasn't even facing the camera. Denied again. Each time the judge barely spoke, just nodded or shook his head. His tone was flat. His mind, I think, was already made up. I wondered if he knew my name or just read it from the paperwork. I watched how he listened when the prosecutor spoke, attentive, alert. When my lawyer spoke, he shuffled papers, tapped his pen. Once, he actually yawned. When I took the stand, I tried to speak clearly, to tell the truth, to show that I wasn't the person they were painting me to be. He didn't take notes. He didn't lean forward, didn't care. And when I finished, when I stepped down and walked back to the defense table, I looked up one last time, hoping somehow that maybe he'd see me now. But he was already looking at the next file. And I knew I wasn't a person to him. I was a case number waiting for a sentence. Chapter 5. Evidence that went ignored. There were fingerprints on the weapon, none of them mine. There was a surveillance tape from across the street that showed a tall man in a blue hoodie, nearly 6 feet tall. I'm barely 5'8". I was wearing red, but they said I fit the general description. There were receipts, time-stamped, showing I was at the store during the exact time of the incident. My manager gave a statement. My co-worker backed it up, but when the evidence was presented, the prosecutor dismissed it as convenient. Convenient. As if truth had a schedule, as if facts were suspicious. The tape didn't make it to court. Too grainy, the prosecutor said. The judge nodded. Denied. The fingerprint analysis was mentioned once and never again. My lawyer tried to argue. He brought up the mismatch in height, clothing, timeline. But he wasn't just fighting the prosecution, he was fighting the silence, the shrug, the unspoken rule that in that courtroom the truth was optional. One officer even admitted, under oath, that he hadn't read me my rights, that he hadn't reviewed all the evidence, that he didn't check the alibi, but that didn't change anything. Because once a story is told enough times by the right people, it becomes real. Even if it isn't. And mine was rewritten. The jury never saw the receipts, never reviewed the footage. They heard what the prosecution wanted them to hear. And everything else was ignored. Like me. Chapter 6. The testimony they dismissed. She sat in the witness stand, legs crossed, voice trembling but clear. I hadn't seen her in years, not since we sat next to each other in biology class. Her name was Simone, and on the night in question, she'd seen me. Not near the crime scene, at a store. We were both in line. She waved, I waved back. It wasn't a moment I thought I'd ever have to remember, but thank God she did. When she took the stand, she told them exactly that. Said she saw me near the candy aisle, said I left around 8:20 p.m. Said there was no way I could have been across town when the robbery happened at 8:30. My heart lifted. For the first time I thought, maybe this will change everything. But the prosecutor leaned forward with that slick smile and said, "You're sure it was him?" "Yes," she said. "I've known him since middle school." "And you two were close?" Simone frowned. "We were classmates." The prosecutor nodded slowly. "So, you might have reason to protect him?" "No, I'm just telling the truth." The jury didn't nod. They didn't write. They just stared. The judge didn't ask a single question. And when my lawyer asked the court to take her statement seriously, the prosecutor laughed. Of course she'd say that. She has no reason not to lie. They dismissed her. Just like that. The whole truth, tossed away. I looked at her as she stepped down. Her eyes met mine. She gave me a sad smile. One that said, "I tried." But trying wasn't enough for them. The next day they brought in a supposed eyewitness, a man who said he saw someone run from the scene. His description was vague. He couldn't confirm a face. He didn't remember the clothes. but he nodded when asked if it could have been me, and that was enough for them. When Simone came to visit me 2 weeks later, she was angry. "They didn't want to hear me," she said. "They never wanted to." We sat across the glass divider. She held her hand up to the glass and said, "You didn't deserve this." Her voice cracked. I had no words. I just held my hand up too. For a brief second, I felt human again. But that moment was short. Visiting hours ended, the lights dimmed, and I went back to my cell with her voice echoing in my head. That courtroom wasn't built for truth. It was built for performance. Because in that courtroom, truth wasn't the point. Winning was. Chapter 7. Whispers outside the courtroom. The courtroom doors closed behind me, but the verdict hadn't even been read yet. I was on a break. 10 minutes to breathe. 10 minutes to be reminded that I still existed outside that cold room. But even in the hallway, I wasn't free. I heard them. 2 men in suits near the vending machine. They didn't see me standing just around the corner. "Open and shut," one said. "You can tell just by looking at him. These kids always have a record. Just takes time to catch them." I wanted to scream, but I couldn't afford to, not in a place like this. Not when every breath could be turned against me. Outside, a group of reporters waited by the courthouse steps. They didn't shout my name, didn't try to interview my mom. They were waiting for the prosecution, waiting for the version of the story they could package neatly for the 6 o'clock news. My mom held my hand tighter as we walked past, her knuckles pale, her voice quiet. "Don't listen to them, baby. They don't know you." But it wasn't just the men by the vending machine. It was the whispers in the line for coffee, the glances in the parking lot, the woman who pulled her purse closer when I walked by. It was the bailiff who never looked me in the eye, the clerk who sighed when I asked a question, the feeling that no matter where I stood, the weight of judgment had already landed. The trial was happening inside, but outside, the sentence had already been spoken. Not by the law, but by the silence that followed me everywhere I went. Chapter 8. The verdict they wrote before the trial. It wasn't a surprise. Not the way the prosecutor smiled when he rested his case, not the way the judge barely looked up as he gave instructions to the jury, and definitely not the way the jury filed back into the room, eyes low, hands folded, like they already knew what they were about to say. It took them less than 3 hours, 12 people, 3 hours, to decide the course of the rest of my life. I remember watching the clock, not out of nervousness, but out of resignation. Because the truth is, the verdict wasn't written that day. It had been written long before I took the stand. Maybe before I was even born. I tried to hold on to a shred of hope. That someone on that jury had doubts. That someone would remember Simone's testimony. That someone would ask to review the grainy tape one more time. But no one did. The foreman, a man with a navy black blazer and a wedding ring he kept spinning, stood and cleared his throat. We, the jury, find the defendant, and the rest faded. My mother gasped. My heart didn't drop. It had already been on the floor since day one. Guilty. That word felt like an echo of something expected. I looked over at the jury. None of them could meet my eyes. Not one. as if by looking at me they'd see the truth they chose to ignore. The judge nodded like it was routine. He said a few words I didn't catch. My lawyer patted my shoulder with a hand that felt more sorry than surprised. I tried to read my mother's face. Her hand was over her mouth. Her shoulders shook, but she stood. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She stood. Because Black mothers have had to stand through verdicts like these for generations. And I said, still hollow, wondering how it ever felt possible that it could end any other way. They led me out the side door, through a hallway I'd never seen before, one made just for people like me, those who leave a courtroom in chains. In the holding room, my lawyer tried to speak, said we could appeal, said there were still options, but all I could hear was that word, guilty. It was printed in the minds of everyone who watched, etched into the headlines that would follow, branded into my record, my identity, my life. They hadn't just decided my fate, they'd rewritten who I was, and the ink they used was permanent. Chapter 9. The sentence that broke my family. They told me to stand. My legs were numb, but I rose. The judge didn't look at me. He looked at the paper in front of him, the same way someone might read off a grocery list. His voice didn't change when he spoke, but the words felt like bricks. 15 years. My mother cried out. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of cry that sounds like something inside just cracked. My sister, who had just turned 12, buried her face in her coat sleeve. My uncle sat frozen, no movement, just disbelief. I couldn't cry. I was too hollow to feel the weight of those years. 15 years of birthdays I wouldn't see, family dinners I wouldn't taste, hugs I wouldn't give, time that didn't belong to me anymore. I turned to them one last time as the bailiff moved toward me. My mother mouthed, "I love you." That image, her face wet with tears, fighting to be strong for me, is burned into my mind more vividly than any memory of my childhood. And I broke. Not in that moment, not in the courtroom, but later, when the bars shut and the silence swallowed me whole. It wasn't just my life that changed with that sentence. It was my family's. Because when they imprisoned me, they didn't just lock up one person. They sentenced my mother to 15 years of aching. My sister to 15 years of growing up without her brother. My family to 15 years of waiting. And no one in that courtroom, not the jury, not the judge, not the prosecutor, would ever have to carry what they broke that day. Chapter 10. Protests in the Rain. The first time I saw the footage, I was already behind bars. It came through a fuzzy TV screen in the corner of the common room. A sea of umbrellas, signs held high, people screaming my name. It was raining, pouring, really, but still they marched. Justice for Jamal. That's what the sign said, my name, carved out in black ink and cardboard, shaking in the wind. I didn't know any of them, but they were out there, teachers, students, pastors, neighbors, some of them holding hands, others with soaked hoodies pulled tight over their heads. I didn't cry, not then, but something in me cracked. Seeing people I'd never met, fight for me harder than the system ever had. My mother stood in the front, microphone in hand, rain streaking down her face like tears, but her voice didn't shake. My son was never given a chance, but I will not stop until the world hears his story. Those words echoed in my head every night after. The guards scoffed, called them troublemakers. But I knew better. They were the storm. Not the rain that fell from the sky, but the force that came with it. In that cell, for the first time since the trial, I felt something other than helpless. I felt seen, and even if my name had been buried in a courtroom full of silence, it was being shouted into the streets, loud enough to matter, loud enough to shake the walls that held me in. Chapter 11. A Mother's Plea for Justice. She never wanted a microphone, never wanted the spotlight. But after that sentence, after 15 years was stamped across her son's future like a date on an envelope, she knew silence would only make the injustice permanent. She started at town halls, folding chairs, low ceilings, bad coffee. She stood up with her palms trembling and her voice steady. "My son did not get a fair trial," she'd say. "He did not get a fair jury, and I will not stop until that is known." Some people nodded. Some didn't look at her. A few offered comfort. Others whispered when she passed. She didn't care. Next came churches, school gyms, community forums. She printed flyers with Jamal's face. She wrote letters to newspapers. She emailed anyone who'd listen. Politicians, journalists, civil rights attorneys. She stopped sleeping through the night. Her Bible sat untouched on the nightstand, its pages marked by tears, not by bookmarks. She learned the law, she read legal briefs, she studied appeals, not because she was a lawyer, but because she was a mother. And mothers don't surrender. I heard stories of her speeches through letters, through visitors who said, "Your mama got the whole room standing." She never missed a visiting day. She smiled, even when she was tired. She held my hand through the glass and whispered, "We're gonna get you home." It wasn't just a promise. It was a vow, and I knew in that moment, when the system had stripped me of everything, when the world had labeled me a criminal, my mother stood taller than any judge I'd ever seen. Because she carried truth in her voice, and no sentence could silence that. Chapter 12. The day they called me guilty. I remember every sound in that courtroom, every cough, every creak of a chair, every shuffle of paper. But when the foreman stood, the world went still. We, the jury, fined the defendant. My ears rang. I didn't hear the rest, but I saw it. My mother gasped, her hands gripping the edge of the pew. My lawyer closed his eyes. The bailiff shifted his weight. And me? I stared straight ahead, waiting for the weight of a word I already knew was coming. Guilty. I'd heard that word before, in movies, on TV, but I never knew how heavy it would feel until it was mine. They didn't just say I committed a crime. They said I was the crime. I felt the stares on my back as I was led out of the courtroom. Reporters scribbled notes, strangers whispered, but no one looked at me like I was human. I wanted to scream, to ask, "What more did you need? What didn't you hear? What made you so sure?" But the truth is, they were never listening. They didn't see the boy who worked late shifts to help his mum with rent. They didn't see the kid who dreamed of studying architecture. They only saw the color of my skin and the name on a docket. And in their eyes, that was enough. The doors closed behind me. Cold metal cuffs tightened around my wrists. My knees buckled for a moment, but I stayed upright. Back in the holding cell, it hit me all over again. Not just the verdict, but the erasure. The fact that in that room, no part of my truth had mattered. My cellmate asked what happened. I couldn't speak, just sat there, replaying the way my mother looked when the word was spoken. That crack in her voice, that tremble in her shoulders. She hadn't just lost a son to the system, she'd lost faith in it. I didn't eat that night. Didn't sleep either. I just stared at the cracks in the wall, wondering how justice could be so easily rewritten. The next morning, a guard passed by and said, "Tough break, kid. Tough break." As if this was a game. I closed my eyes and imagined being home. I imagined building homes, what I wanted to do before all this. I imagined a life that was no longer mine to claim. Because I knew the real sentence wasn't just years in prison. It was a lifetime of being believed guilty before I even had a chance to speak. And that sentence had started long before the jury ever spoke it out loud. Chapter 13. Behind Bars, Still Black. Prison didn't erase my skin. If anything, it made it stand out more. The walls were beige, the uniforms grey, the guards wore navy, but me, I wore the one thing they couldn't take off me: blackness. And inside those walls, that came with its own kind of sentence. From the first day, I knew where I stood. The guards called me boy like it was my name. The older inmates nodded at me, some in solidarity, others in warning. The lines were already drawn. Black, white, brown. The same lines from the outside, but sharper. Every day followed the same script. Wake up, chow line, head count, work, repeat. But nothing about it felt routine. It felt like survival. In the library, I read everything I could. History, law, poetry. I wanted to know the system that swallowed me. I wanted to understand how it had been designed, not broken. They said, do your time. But time in prison doesn't pass. It hangs, it circles, and sometimes it claws at you when the lights go out. Some nights I dreamed of home, my mum cooking dinner, my sister painting her nails at the kitchen table. I'd wake up, choking on the silence, remembering that freedom wasn't just space. It was the presence of people who see you as human. The guards didn't. The system didn't. Most of the world didn't. But I did. Every time I saw my reflection in the metal mirror bolted to the wall, I whispered, "You're still here. You still matter." Because behind bars, I wasn't just an inmate. I was still black. Still breathing. Still waiting for a world that would finally see me for more than what they feared. Chapter 14. When the truth finally came out. It started with a letter. Just one. From a journalist named Kevin, who had been at one of the protests. He'd heard my mother speak, heard the cracks in her voice, heard the conviction underneath every word. He requested transcripts, dug through files, interviewed Simone again, watched the grainy surveillance tape, frame by frame, and in that blur of pixels and poor lighting, he saw what the court had refused to see. It wasn't me. He didn't stop there. He filed open records requests. He found discrepancies. Witness statements changed over time. Police notes that didn't match what was said in court. A fingerprint report conveniently excluded from evidence. He called civil rights attorneys. One of them agreed to review the case, then another. Soon there were petitions, articles, a podcast episode. Suddenly, the story that had been buried came crawling back into daylight. The court system doesn't move fast, but it does move when enough people make noise. When enough truth stacks up against a lie, the weight becomes undeniable. An appeal was filed. This time, a new judge. This time, a courtroom that didn't lean away. This time, eyes that looked at me. The evidence they ignored the first time was now center stage. The fingerprints, the receipts, Simone's testimony, the faulty lineup, even the officer who hadn't read me my rights was called back. And this time, under a different light, his answers cracked. And then came the words I never thought I'd hear. Conviction overturned. 12 years after my arrest. 12 years after a jury decided who I was before I had a chance to speak. 12 years stolen. But finally, the truth didn't just exist. It was heard. Chapter 15. A name cleared but not forgotten. They released me on a Tuesday. The sky was grey, but to me it looked like freedom. I stepped through the gates with nothing but a small box of possessions and a body that had learned how to shrink to fit into spaces too small for justice. My mother was waiting, arms wide, tears falling freely. My sister stood beside her, older now, stronger too. She'd grown up while I was behind bars. Her smile made me ache. I didn't know how to be free. Every noise startled me. Every shadow felt like a cell door, but I breathed. One breath, then another. Each one a reminder. I survived. The first meal at home tasted like something sacred. Fried chicken, greens, cornbread, just like I remembered. But even in the warmth of that kitchen, I couldn't stop scanning every window, listening for a guard's voice that would never come again. The press tried to talk to me, cameras flashed, microphones shoved in my face. I didn't have the words. How do you summarize 12 stolen years in a soundbite? I went home, to a house that felt the same but wasn't. The couch had new cushions. The photos on the wall were different. My room was now an office. I didn't mind. I was just glad it still stood. At night, I couldn't sleep. My body was used to hard mattresses, sudden lights, metal slamming shut. Now, the silence of home felt foreign. My mum sat with me those first nights. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. Over the weeks, people reached out. Neighbors, strangers, old friends. Some said they always believed me. Some said nothing at all. A few crossed the street when they saw me. I didn't need their apologies. I needed my life back. I went back to the courthouse. Not to testify, not to fight. Just to stand outside and remember. Because that building took something from me. And it never said sorry. One afternoon, I spoke to a classroom of teenagers. I told them about the arrest, the trial, the years. A girl in the front row asked, "What hurt the most?" I paused, then said, "Being invisible." Now, I speak at schools, at forums. I sit on panels. I tell people what it feels like to lose time you can never get back. I fight for those still inside. I mentor kids who think the system is too big to beat. Because it's not just about clearing a name, it's about changing what names mean. It's about reminding the world that names carry lives. And mine, Jamal Carter, will never be forgotten again. Not because I was a headliner, but because I kept standing, even when the world tried to erase me.